Flower composition is a struggle for many beginners, so in this video I've decided to guide you along the process of painting this watercolor flower composition, where we are going to understand how to approach a flower composition like this one, where to add the flowers, where to add the leaves, and overall how to give a flow to the whole composition. My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Let's start painting together. The first thing that, in my opinion, you need to understand when you're approaching a flower composition is to decide which kind of flow you want to give to your composition. In this case, in this watercolor flower piece, I've decided to start to mix some warm colors like brilliant Ochre rose, some transparent orange and Scarlet Red to create a warm sort of red for the first hero flower. I usually like to start painting my flower compositions from the hero flowers, and in this case this hero flower is located in the center right part of the page. I've decided to locate this flower in this area just to give it a little bit of a different spin, not to have it exactly in the center of the page. And following this idea, I'm going to add secondary flowers up towards the left corner of the page and down towards the corner in the left area of this page. Therefore, I will create a sort of reverse C shape. I am using a flat brush to create the shape of these petals, and as you can notice, I am really adding a lot of pigment to create these petals. I'm adding then a little bit of Ochre rose and Quinacridone Magenta into the wet petals to allow some blending effects to happen through the wet on wet technique. After you create your main hero flower, in this case it is only one, in your flower compositions you can have one or two depending on how you want to structure your flower composition. Well, after you have created your hero flower, you can start to create your secondary flowers. Secondary flowers, in my case, are always flowers that are smaller in size compared to the hero flower. And in this case, I'm adding these flowers that are similar in shape to the hero flower in the center. They just have different color values and different color hues, which means different colors overall, but they all have these simple petals, and I have kept the center white to add in a second moment some yellow center. So my recommendation for you when you are painting flower compositions is to think which type of flow you want to give to your watercolor flowers. So in this case, as I said, this is going to be a reverse C shape. Think which ones are your hero flowers and how you want to structure your secondary flowers. And remember that you can give the flow to the whole composition you're creating thanks to the shape of your flowers, the direction they are turned, and also in a second moment when you're going to add the leaves as well. In this composition, I'm going to also talk a little bit about colors, and I'm going to give you a few tips on how you can create a cohesive color palette. In this example, I am keeping the whole composition towards the warm colors, and mainly transparent orange and some types of pink like Quinacridone Magenta and Ochre rose are the main leading colors of this whole flower piece. I keep in mind to always mix together with other colors I want to add to my color palette these main colors that I have just used for the hero flower in the center. Therefore, the hero flower in the center does not only become the center of the attention for the shape, the biggest shape throughout the whole composition, but also becomes a sort of link between the upper flowers, the upper filling flowers that are towards the Scarlet Red color, and the flowers in the bottom part of the composition that are towards the colder color like Quinacridone Purple, which is a color that I have mixed together with Quinacridone Magenta Brilliant Rose to create the filling flowers in the lower part of the page. Therefore, my recommendation for you is when you are approaching a flower composition to think before adding paint to the brush and to the paper which colors you want your composition to be in, and also to mix together the predominant colors that you want your compositions to be in with the secondary colors that you want, for example, your filling flowers to be created with. When it comes to add your stems and your leaves, this is also something that you can plan beforehand, and if generally you want to have your leaves in a green color, also the green you're using can be connected and can be a link towards the flowers you have already created if you are mixing a little bit of the green you have in your color palette with some of the predominant colors that your flowers are created with. In this case, for example, we are going to mix some Sap Green with some red colors that we have used to create the petals of these flowers to create different shades and different color values of leaves for this flower composition. You can mix your colors in a separate color palette and you can have all your colors ready when you start to paint. But you can also paint your flower composition and as you go mix the colors that you want to have your flowers and your leaves in. This is a little bit up to you, and this is part of the creative journey that you can explore. I personally like to mix the colors in my color palette while I'm painting, and while I'm doing this I can decide which color use to lean towards. And in this case, for example, it can be towards a warmer or darker color use, where I can add a little bit more blue if I want something darker, or a little bit more red into the green if I want something a little bit more muted and warm. At this point, I'm adding leaves to my flower composition, and in particular, I'm taking care to add leaves in sizes and in positions that keep giving a flow to this whole composition. It means that these leaves are leading the eyes of the observer towards particular places onto the page. For example, also the biggest leaves are located in the center next to the hero flower, also because this is the central flower, and smaller leaves are leading the eyes of the observer toward the upper left corner of the page and down to the left part of this floral piece. When you're painting your watercolor flower compositions, remember here and there to pause and look at what you have painted. In this case, for example, I stopped and I noticed that I wanted to add some more contrasting brush strokes into the lighter leaves that I've created, and so I added a few brush strokes in Cobalt Green Dark. I just used the side of my brush and I took advantage of the wet on wet technique to allow different greens to blend while the surface of the leaves is still wet. And at this point I change my brush and I take a small round brush in size 6 to start adding details to the center of the flowers. If you enjoyed this tutorial, and also if you would like to learn more, I'm excited to announce that my new course that is called Floral Art Quick Start is now available. This is a 2-hour-long online course where I cover everything that will accelerate your development as a watercolor artist, including, for example, in-depth instructions on flowers and leaf placement, but also, for example, I talk about layering techniques, color selections, and overall, I explain you how to approach and achieve beautiful, loose-style flower compositions in watercolor. Best of all, my course is all hands-on, and in each lesson you will create a full composition instead of just doing repetitive drills. Click the link down below to learn more and sign up. And so for now, back to this watercolor flower composition, I've decided to add a few details as layers onto the petals. I've decided to do this in order to give a little bit more depth to this whole composition, because I really like how the blends of the different colors onto the petals are happening, but I think they can be enhanced by these layering effects while the painting of the petals is completely dry. And so I'm doing this, adding some contrasting brush strokes onto the leaves, and I'm trying to highlight what the shapes of the petals are. I'm using the tip of my brush when I want to create very fine lines, and instead I'm using the belly of this round brush in size 6 to create some lines that are a little bit thicker. It is up to you to decide whether you want to add these layers onto your petals or, for example, even onto your leaves. And you can obtain certainly different effects whether you add these layers or not. What I like about this process is that really adding layers can enhance different parts and different areas of your watercolor painting. And therefore, mastering this technique can really allow you to access so many different ways you can approach a flower composition that really no watercolor piece will be similar to anything you have painted in the past. This is why, for example, layering is the chapter number 2 of this course, Floral Art Quick Start. I really dive into this technique and I show you on all the paintings we are going to paint together throughout this whole course how to add layers to your flower compositions. On this painting we are adding now a few details in the center part of the flowers, and I've decided to use mainly a mixture of burnt umber and Mars black to add these fine lines, mainly using the tip of this small brush. Then, with a little bit of yellow ochre, I just go back to the center that is still wet, that I created in lemon yellow, to allow some yellow ochre and yellow lemon to just blend onto the paper. For your flower compositions in watercolor, remember that you can obtain different effects whether you allow the colors to blend directly onto the paper or if you create a mixture of different colors onto your color palette and then you add brush strokes onto your flower composition. So for example, onto the petals and for the leaves of this flower composition, we have allowed different colors to blend directly onto the paper through the wet on wet technique. But for example, for the stems, I have created a mixture of green onto the color palette, and then I've used this color mixture and I have created the stems of these flowers. And at this point, with a round brush in size 6, I've decided to add a few brush strokes in blue color, this is Cobalt Blue, just to enhance the shape of this flower composition and to, let's say, enhance also how the observer can look at this whole flower piece. And so in the upper part of this flower composition, I'm just using a mixture of Cobalt Blue, while in the lower part of the composition, I'm mixing this color, Cobalt Blue, with a little bit of Cobalt Violet. So as a recap, remember when you are approaching a flower composition to have in mind how do you want the flow of your composition to be. You can obtain the flow by using different techniques, wet in wet and wet in dry, and also by leading the eyes of the observer through the shapes of your flowers and your leaves. Remember that you can enhance some parts of your compositions compared to others thanks to the technique of layering, and you can do this, in my opinion, in the best way using a small round brush. For example, I have a round brush in size 6 that I mainly use for this purpose. You can layer only your flowers, or for example, you can layer also your leaves, depending on the effect you want to achieve for your watercolor flower piece. I really hope this tutorial was useful. Thank you so much for watching!